Let's go back to the late 1960s. Yeah. What can you tell us about COINTELPRO?
COINTELPRO was a covert FBI program originally launched in the 1950s.
There's been a lot of reviews and criticism, probably rightly so, about COINTELPRO, which was short for Counterintelligence Program, a fancy name for something that really has kind of always been around.
The program was a series of secret FBI initiatives targeting activists, political, and minority groups.
We had one World War II, we had the 50s and what was theoretically the American dream. There was a war going on in Vietnam, which was effectively a war against communism. And at that time, we were losing every week 70, 80 Americans. Think about that now. On the other side of the world, you had the Soviet Union, who was perceived as our biggest threat, and probably was so. I mean, they were good at, as they are now, fomenting unrest and discord within American society.
Special Agent Graham concedes that while it is true that the FBI operated extrajudicially in the fog of the Red Scare during the late 60s, it's also true that many American counterculture groups they targeted were being propped up by the Soviet Union, which I find to be very interesting. Looking back at the records of daily newspapers from Moscow, you can see that Peltier's face was plastered on the front page almost every week for 3 consecutive years with headlines about America being a rotten, crooked place.
It's a face which on the other side of the world, in the Soviet Union, is as familiar as Ronald Reagan's.
Declaring Peltier a political prisoner and sometimes using exact copy that was used to describe Nelson Mandela when he was arrested in South Africa.
Political prisoner in the heart of America. That's the Soviet message.
It's not.
And on television, the Soviets follow Peltier the way Americans keep track of dissidents like Sakharov or Sharansky.
Simultaneously, the Peltier story received almost no coverage in the States, falling to the wayside as Americans were absorbed by the death of Elvis Presley, the tragic plane crash involving Leonard Skinner, and George Lucas' first Star Wars movie. The Soviets were even flying Peltier's family and friends to Russia for press conferences and televised interviews.
Stephanie Autumn was Peltier's common-law wife.
I've gone over testimony. I've talked to almost everyone that was there that day, and I know that Leonard is innocent.
Last year, she and 2 other supporters took their cause to the Soviet Union.
In a Cold War context, this media attention definitely only deepened the FBI's grudge against Peltier, who they saw as an avatar in the Soviet effort to sow internal discord and governmental distrust amongst American citizens.
So you feel like, to a certain extent, the Soviet Union played a role in sowing some of the discord in the late 60s?
I believe so. What better way to beat a society than erode it from the inside and have that society fighting against itself? It's probably easier now for them, right? You have social media, you got the internet, but a lot of the same tactics, just publicizing perceived wrongs by the government.
We went to the Soviet Union because Indians going to the Soviet Union gets media attention.
And he is innocent.
Task correspondent in Washington, Igor Ignatieff, covers the story.
You have to look at the activities of the FBI and the people doing COINTELPRO through that prism of what they were confronting at the time. You had a war effectively against communism. American GIs are losing their lives weekly in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Protests in the U.S., the Weathermen, Black Panthers, violent protests that had gone. So, in the 60s, you had some of these movements. Maybe their ultimate motive and goals were honorable and just. Sometimes the activities they undertook to achieve those goals were pretty troubling, right? So, AIM had taken over Alcatraz, they had taken over BIM, they had the Mayflower. So there was these protests had gone a little off the rails. You had other groups, you had the American Communist Party, you had the Black Panthers, you had these groups that were sending fear through traditional American society. I'm not justifying their illegal wiretaps of Martin Luther King or anything like that, but it is not as sinister as some would like the world to believe. And certainly, I think what our adversaries would want to, that message that our adversaries would want to have the American public believe.